Welcome to this drawing tutorial. It's going to give you the steps you need to design your own water dragon. So there's mine, pretty much finished. Let's get started. What is composition? Simple. That is your arrangement of main shapes within a frame. So I'm just going to sketch myself out a few planning frames to try and understand what my composition is going to be. So here's a kind of portrait orientated frame. I've got a landscape one. I'll stick another portrait one down at the bottom. So the body shape is the main shape. So a nice sweeping curved S shape to start with. That could look good. Let's try my landscape one, a little more complicated, an S. I think I'm gonna with an extra curve, and then my last idea is a kind of looped curve shape. Now I need to decide where I might put the head, where I might put the tail. So the heads I'm going to mark on with a triangle, the tails with an arrowhead. I think I'll extend that a bit so it overlaps, could be interesting. And again on my last one you see the triangle for the head, the arrow for the tail. So looking at them, I think I quite like the one on the right, the landscape one, and I'm going to try and sketch that out now bigger. So what you'll notice first, I'm going to try and fill my A4 page. Alright, twist it around so it's landscape. I'm going to have to keep, it's a bit annoying and awkward, I've got to keep flicking the page back to reference it. But you'll notice my big sweeping shape, look at the way I'm drawing, right? I've got my fingers locked and my wrist locked and my whole arm is moving, okay? These are not lines that are going to stay forever. You're going to rub them out. So keep it light, be quite rough, but try and glide across the surface of the page, yeah? These are construction lines. So you see I've marked my head on. Note about the head, look, make the triangle for the head shape quite big. Alright, you want some area to fill detail in with. Now, I'm going to keep my life simple, right? I'm going to keep it very symmetrical. No difficult angles. Okay, I'm going to mark on my nostrils and my eyes, simple circles. From there, I'm going to start thinking about some of the features of the dragon. I'm working purely from imagination. You might want to find reference pictures. Alright, I'm just going totally from imagination. Some angles across the eyelids. Yeah. Make my dragon look a little more menacing. Alright, bit more expression, some frills, okay, some fin shapes. Again, look at the way I'm drawing, fingers locked, wrist locked. I'm very much gliding around, not in a handwriting grip. Okay, rub a few of my construction lines out so I can put more fin shapes in. Now I'm going to flesh out the body. So that initial line I've done is just a guide. Either side of that, I'm going to add more lines that are going to be my outlines of the body. Obviously, it needs to have a bit of flesh. It's probably going to taper. That means get thinner towards the tail. So make sure I've got a bit of a bulge around the belly there, look, and then thinner at the tail. Added a bit of frill detail on my tail. Now, new page. Before I start doing anything else, I want to understand my techniques. So we're going to be using, to add detail, pen and brush. So I've got a handwriting pen here. The great thing about handwriting pens, nice thin nib, yeah, good for drawing detail with, but they're also water soluble. Right, so you'll see what I mean by that in a minute. I'm marking on a kind of belly pattern here, if you imagine like a belly of a snake. Alright, and I'm going to leave it at that for now. I'm not going to do any other scale patterns or anything. I'm going to get my brush. Now watch what I do. I'm going to do what we call a wet wash on there. I'm simply I put my water pot so you can see. All I'm doing is putting some water into the area where I want my pen to bleed into. So watch, my brush is now touching the line. Because the page is wet, the ink, being soluble, wants to spread and blend into that wet page. Alright, giving you a nice soft tone and a bit of a blended edge where the brush has hit the line. So working in a bit more detail into my kind of belly pattern, if you like, you can see what I'm getting at. And you need to practice this first, because you're going to want to know, well, what happens if I put this amount of water on my brush and then touch a black line? Yeah, how much would it bleed? How much control have I got? So take it easy, practice first. Okay, so note also, I do want a scale pattern or some sort of pattern on the body, but I've not drawn it first yet. I've done my blend that I'm painting in now, my soft bit of tone first. Now that's because, and you'll see why right now, I'll demonstrate, if I draw a quick kind of scale pattern, could be hatched lines like this, or it could be dots, when you then brush over it, it almost disappears. Alright, the dots probably work better because there's less ink down, but certainly the crisscross pattern or the hatched pattern is not working too well. So I would strongly suggest you, if you want to keep it nice and detailed and precise, you get any brushwork done first, then draw over the top. You'll see what I mean. So I've done myself a little patch or a wash of tone there. I'm going to let that dry, come back to it when it's dry. Okay, while it's drying, I'm going to try another little pattern I had, which is some sort of loop type shapes. Coming on nicely there. And I'm going to try really hard to keep it under control, but just sort of brush between those shapes. I think that might be quite a cool pattern. So this is a tiny bit of water and very end of the brush. It takes a lot of patience, a lot of control, but it could be a good idea if you're one of those people who's got a lot of patience and a lot of control. Have a go first. Alright, that could look quite good as a pattern for the body of my dragon. Now, tried another experiment there, and while I've been doing those, my little wash of ink tone is dry. So now I can put a really detailed pattern over that, and I know it's not going to bleed or smudge. So I like the idea of dots, big dots fading into small dots to give me a kind of gradient or the feeling of a blend. What about a scale pattern? Now that could look really good. Just a series of little semicircular shapes all layered up on top of each other. That could look really smart too. So I'm giving myself options, plus I'm getting confidence with my materials. I'm understanding that if I want a precise pattern, which I do, I'm going to have to do my brushwork, my blend first, then let it dry, then work over. So is that dry enough yet to work on? I'm going to try my dot pattern. Try some scales first, some longer, thinner scales, because they could be an option. Quite like those. But I think I probably want to go with my dots. Let's have a look. Yeah, I like the way they create a gradient and almost give me the feeling of a bit more 3D. So anyway, back to my dragon. I'm going to do some basic outlining first. Alright, so I'm going into the details of the face, do a bit of outlining. I've added a frill shape as well. It's not really going to have legs or wings, but it could have a nice sort of frill running down the side. So there's my kind of belly pattern that I've nicked from a sort of body of a snake. Coming along nicely. There we go. So I'm almost ready to do my first blend using my water and brush. Alright, a bit more detail on the tail. And I'm going to get my brush out, clean it up a bit. So there we go, look. In with my brush. Remember, brush some wet, just a wash of water and then touch the line. So here we go. It's a tiny amount of water on the end of the brush. I'm creating a bit of contrast, a bit of atmosphere on the face. So how's it drying out? It's pretty good. So I've tried to work out where the spine might be for my design. Alright, and I'm doing some bigger dots along my spine. Okay, and then blending out from my bigger dots, I've got some smaller dots. So zoomed in a bit for you now. some tiny little dots, add a bit more tone and texture to the face. Looking good, pleased with that. Zooming out again, all about my background. Well, it's a water dragon, so some rainy clouds, some watery, wavy type shapes, just some detail to fill what we call those negative spaces. Again, blocking them in, brush them with my brush, looking good. So, look, we rattled through it, right? But you get the idea. Planning, compositional things to consider, technical things to practice. Use your imagination if you want. Do your research and find some reference pictures if that helps. Experiment. Obviously, you're going to need to find a soluble or a water soluble pen, and then a paper that's going to react nicely with that brush and ink, and just enjoy it. Lovely, relaxing drawing activity for you. Hope you enjoy.